My biggest financial goal is to retire in my 40s or at least partially in my 30s. So today I'm going to walk you through how I think about financial independence and my plans to hopefully reach it. There's a lot of personal finance jargon on the internet, but here at Break Your Budget, we cut through the crap and focus on getting the basics right. Earlier this year, I crossed a pretty major net worth milestone, and so many of you asked if I was firing or planning to retire early. And to be completely honest, I never really thought about it because I always associated the FIRE movement with extreme frugality, and transparently, that's just not something I'm super interested in. But after a little bit of research, I learned that not only are there so many different types of FIRE, which by the way, FIRE stands for Financial Independence Retire Early, but that I've also already achieved a degree of financial independence, and with a little bit of extra math and extra intentionality, I guess, I could actually retire years earlier than I ever imagined. So today I'm going to lay out my thought process and my plans with as much detail as I can. Obviously, there's a layer of privacy here for safety, so I'm not going to be sharing like my exact numbers in which what, but I am going to try to illustrate some different scenarios and just share my generalized thought process around the different types of FIRE and what I'm actually working towards and why. So here's what we're going to cover. First being, what is financial independence and what are the different types? Second is going to be what types of financial independence I'm focused on and those general calculations. And third are just some general habits and savings tactics that I'm sticking to so that I can hit my targets. As always, the tools that are featured throughout this video are available in the show notes. Today, I'm specifically going to be using my FIRE planner, which I actually built earlier this year when I got all of these questions, because as I was trying to figure out my own financial independence numbers, I realized that a lot of the tools online are not only super unclear, but also like really clunky and hard to use. So if you like what you see today and you want to calculate your own financial independence numbers and put together a FIRE plan for yourself, I definitely recommend checking out that tool. And with that, let's get right into it. So what does FIRE actually mean? FIRE stands for Financial Independence Retire Early. And really, I would say it's a combination of a financial and a lifestyle movement where you are saving and investing aggressively earlier on in your life in order to have enough money to retire before the traditional age of 60 to 65. The goal is to live intentionally as soon as you start working so that you can save and invest as much as possible and, in essence, buy back years of your working life. The goal is to build enough wealth where you have the freedom to choose the way that you work if you work at all. So to me, there are two layers of this. First is the financial independence layer. And this is where you have enough income from your savings and investments to cover your cost of living without needing to work a traditional job. And generally speaking, when we think about financial independence, we're really thinking about traditional retirement, which is, when you retire from your job in your 60s. The retire early part, though, is the other layer of this. And this is where you buy yourself the option to leave a traditional 9 to 5 in your 30s, 40s, or even 50s. And with this, financial freedom, you have the power to choose the type of work that you're doing. There are so many different types of FIRE that you could choose from. Traditional FIRE is your true financial independence number. And again, when we're thinking about traditional financial independence, we're thinking about traditional retirement age. But if you want to FIRE and retire early, obviously you would need to hit those retirement targets before 65. But there are different types of traditional financial independence too. There's lean financial independence, meaning that you're living frugally and ultimately you don't have to save and invest as much because your living expenses are less. But obviously with this type of FIRE, you have to be really intentional about what you're spending because, you have less money to spend. And then there's FAT FIRE or FAT financial independence, which is where you save and invest a larger amount so that you can spend more when you reach this retirement number. Really what traditional FI makes you think about is retirement more as a number in your bank account as opposed to an age. And that's sort of like a swap when you think about retirement that I'd really encourage you to think about. Moving past these traditional types of financial independence, there are two other types of financial independence that I think are important to touch on. First being Coast-Fi. This is when you've saved and invested enough for retirement early enough where you can stop investing for retirement altogether and just let your investments compound over a period of time. And ultimately, by the age that you've determined is going to be your retirement age, you'll have enough money in that account to cover your expenses. So when I think of Coast-Fi, I'm thinking of my traditional retirement age being 65 and having enough money invested in my traditional retirement accounts where I don't have to add any more money to that principal value, and it will continue to grow over the next, 30 plus years. This is more of a hybrid approach to financial independence because when you really think about working, generally you're working a traditional job for two key reasons. First is to cover your expenses in the present day, and second is to save and invest for your future. So, if you've saved and invested enough for your future where you don't have to save and invest anymore, then theoretically you only need to be earning enough money in order to cover your living expenses in the present day or any shorter term additional savings goals that you might be working towards. So depending on what your numbers are, if you hit Coast-Fi, you may not have to work a traditional 9-to-5 job, or you can scale back to a lower pressure 9-to-5 job. And really what this does is it can just give you different options in your career. And then the second type of FIRE that I think is really important to touch on is Barista FI. This is when you reach partial financial independence. And essentially, once you've reached this number, you can work less hours or a significantly lower stress job like a barista. It doesn't have to be a barista. I'm not saying being a barista is a low stress job, but you get the point, part-time work. And basically, you'll draw down part of your annual income from your investments, and then you'll use the money earned from part-time work to cover the rest of your expenses. So really what this does is it gives you the option to work part-time, but again, you don't have to be working that traditional 9-to-5 job. So those are the types of financial independence to think about. And now let's get into my thought process around all of this and what I'm actually working towards. So when it comes to financial independence, when I'm thinking about my own definition of what it truly means to me, it means that I don't have to go back to working a traditional corporate 9-to-5 job. I feel very passionately about this. I love having work flexibility, and I'm so grateful that I've been able to build a business that affords me the flexibility in my life to work for myself. And I'm doing everything I possibly can to save and invest as much as I possibly can while I'm in this era to help buy back time so that if I do find that my business changes or my revenue changes, I have time to figure out what my next move would be without having to go back to a traditional job. All this to say, I also don't think I see myself going full traditional FIRE before like my 50s or my 60s because I actually do enjoy the work that I do, and I do feel like work plays a pretty big role in my life. So it's kind of hard to imagine what my life would look like with no work whatsoever. Although, if I were to be in a scenario where that was possible, I wouldn't be mad about it. The key that I really want to emphasize is financial independence to me means being able to work jobs that I actually enjoy and not feeling chained to a job that I hate. Right now, I treat Break Your Budget as my full-time job and a full-time business. So even though I work for myself, I still work pretty much entirely full-time hours. I work 40 hours a week and I generally work 9-to-5. So in my mind, I'm working a regular job. I just have control over what I'm doing every day, which I don't ever want to take for granted. But when I think about what financial independence means, it would be more like scaling back the amount of time that I'm working and thus earning a little bit less money and having the flexibility to do that. With all of this, I also do have financial independence goals in mind. So let's talk about what those look like for me. First being Coast-Fi, which I technically have already reached. So what this means is that I don't have to invest any more money into my retirement accounts in order to be able to retire at 59 or 60 with enough money to cover my living expenses for, what would be the rest of my life. Obviously, though, who knows what life is going to look like 30 years from now. So while I still have a full-time business and I'm still earning a full-time income, I do plan to continue to invest into my retirement accounts anyways, if nothing else for the tax advantages in the present day. I also need to make sure that I have some extra money in my retirement accounts too, because I do actually use traditional retirement accounts for my retirement vehicles at the moment. And I know somebody's going to ask about that, but really, I want to make sure I have enough money in there to cover the tax burden when I am retiring, because I will have to pay taxes when I make those withdrawals. So the reason why I'm using traditional accounts, and this was advice from my accountant, so, we've run the numbers and we've looked at things accordingly. Aside from the fact that I earn too much money to contribute to a Roth, there's two key reasons. First being that I earn a high income from my business right now. So contributing to pre-tax accounts allows me to take those tax deductions today, and it actually results in significant savings on what would be an incredibly high tax bill. But the other layer of this is that when I reach retirement, I will likely not be earning, if not with 100% certainty, be earning at the same level, because I plan to scale back to part-time work. So I'll only be taxed on my retirement withdrawals as what my tax bracket is at that point in time, which is going to be lower than what my tax bracket is today. So all of this to say, since I know that I'm going to have that tax burden later, I want to make sure I have extra money in my retirement account. So I'm continuing to invest today, even though I technically don't have to. So yeah, I've already hit Coast FI, so that was a big target for me. But the next target really is Barista FI. And like I mentioned, my big goal is to not have to go back to a corporate job. In an ideal state, I'd work like a little bit of a part-time job, whether that be part-time break your budget or part-time something else. Who knows, again, what the world will look like in 5 or 10 years. But really, why I'm interested in Barista FI is because I genuinely don't see myself not working at all. Like, I'm not wired that way, but I would love at a point in my later 30s or early 40s to be able to scale back a little bit of the pressure that I put on myself to earn and earn and earn through my business and my career. I would love to ultimately have more time to really just enjoy my life, whether that means pursuing different hobbies or spending more time on the hobbies I already have, potentially having a family, but obviously that would significantly impact my FIRE plan. So I don't even know if that's feasible. And I also don't even know if it's something that I want. But really the goal is to create that flexibility where I don't have to work full-time hours beyond my 30s, really. Anyways, that's my thought process around those two types of FIRE. Coast FIRE already achieved. Barista FIRE is something that I'm working towards. I still have kind of a long ways to go with Barista FIRE, so who knows if it's something that's even achievable for me on the timeline that I've set. It really is going to be dependent on how my business performs over the next couple of years, which there's an element to that that's outside of my control. But I am, slowly plugging away at making sure that I'm saving and investing as much as I can and accumulating as many assets as I can right now. It's also a big reason why I haven't pulled the trigger on purchasing real estate, because I know that my money will be working harder for me based off of my goals invested in the stock market. But all of this to say too, when I'm running my calculations for Coast FI and for Barista FI, I'm not including money that I've already set aside for a down payment on a home. So I do actually have some money set aside for a potential down payment, where if I were to invest that money right now, it would probably shave a couple of years off of my Barista FI timeline. But I don't want to do that because I may want to purchase property and I want to have the option. So when it comes to financial independence, really there's no like prescriptive do this, not that. It really does depend on your personal goals, your personal financial situation. And what I find to be the most empowering is having a tool that actually lays everything out for you so you can make those decisions for yourself. Now that we've covered what my financial independence goals are, I want to share the tactical things that I'm doing in order to actually reach these annual targets. So my savings targets are actually pretty aggressive, and they do require a higher income, which currently I am earning. But again, I don't know what the runway is for that because I do run an online business, right? So it's very dependent on social media and it could change. That being said, I have taken steps to create a sense of stability in my business through selling digital products and diversifying both my social platforms and my revenue streams so that I'm not like fully dependent on one way of earning. But as with any business or any job, things can change. So I'm just trying to make the most of it while I can. So, with all of this in mind, here's how I take this FIRE plan and implement it into the personal finance dashboard, which is the money management tool that I use to manage my money on like a month to month, week to week basis. First, my FIRE plan provides annual spending and savings targets, and I actually plan ultra conservatively. So, my spending targets are higher than what they'll likely be, and my savings targets are lower than what they'll likely be. But I use this information to help inform and plan out my monthly and annual budget, as well as my monthly and annual spending, saving, and investment goals. In my FIRE plan, my annual spending target is about $72,000, which is actually a little bit more than what I will likely spend this year. I'm actually planning to spend between $60,000 and $65,000 in 2025. And then my savings target is $30,000. So what I'll do is I'll take that and I'll break it down into monthly increments. And then I basically just build that into my annual spending plan. When it comes to financial goals and like reaching financial targets, I think we overcomplicate things. Really, you need to figure out what your annual targets are, which the FIRE planner will do for you. And then you need to divide it by 12 and build it into your monthly budget. If the math on that isn't mathing for you based off of your income, then you'll need to make some different adjustments, whether that be to your expenses or to just elongate your savings and retirement targets. In terms of like the tactical day-to-day, week-to-week money management habits, none of it is new if you are somebody who watches my videos regularly, but I'll give you a quick summary. First is that I track my expenses weekly, and I also work through a comprehensive monthly money review every single month. The purpose of this is to help avoid overspending and impulse spending so that it never becomes a habit for me, but also to make sure that I'm just regularly realigning my spending and saving targets so that I can actually hit my annual goals. Obviously, my spending, just like yours, probably fluctuates month to month. So some months I'm able to save more, some months I save less. Really, the goal is to hit those annual targets. So if 1 month I go over and 1 month I go under, the goal is for those to even out on the annual total. So by doing these monthly reviews and realigning my spending and savings, it just ensures that I stay on track all year long. Number 2 is that I pay attention to my spending pretty rigorously. And this is through both expense tracking, but generally with how I feel on a regular basis. I know my spending values, so I'm not going out and about buying random stuff. I'm not easily influenced with TikTok and social media trends. I'm not shopping on TikTok Shop or Amazon on the regular. When I do buy things, I buy things that I need, I buy things that I use, and I buy things that I love. And I'm really, really intentional whenever I make a purchase. If there is a scenario where I'm buying something that isn't like 100% necessary, I'm always making sure that I'm factoring those purchases into both my monthly and annual spending targets. The annual spending target is so important because on a monthly basis, it's really easy to justify being a couple $100s over. But if you do that on a consistent basis, month to month, it will skew your annual target. And ultimately, you'll spend more on an annual basis than maybe you are realizing. So looking at it through an annual lens is something I highly recommend that you do. And number 3 is that I've made intentional lifestyle choices to avoid overinflating my annual spend. Since I'm currently single and I live alone, like I don't need to purchase a home. I don't need to live in a 2 or 3 bedroom apartment. I can live in a smaller space and keep those living expenses low, knowing that there will come a day where my expenses are going to look a little bit different. But while I'm in this phase of life and while I'm earning a little bit more than I otherwise would if I was in a corporate job, I'm really trying to be intentional about keeping my expenses steady so that I can continue to save and invest aggressively and buy back my life. When it really comes down to it, financial independence is a formula. All it is a little math where you look at your spending, how much money you need to save, and you run some forecasts out for the future based off of pretty standard investment forecasting predictions. That being said, it is impossible to accurately forecast and predict your financial independence numbers without knowing what your annual spend targets are and without knowing your current net worth. So if you don't know those already, I highly recommend checking out the personal finance dashboard or my basic budgeting template and using that for 3 to 6 months so you can get a better gauge of how much money you're spending and saving on a monthly and annual basis, and also what your current net worth is is so that you can take that information and accurately forecast and calculate your financial independence numbers. Numbers are meaningless if you're not using data that's actually representative of how you spend and save. So if you're looking for any of those tools, obviously they are available in the description of this video. Let me know if you enjoyed what you learned in this video or if you have any questions about anything I talked about. And with that, I will catch you next week.